This history focuses on communication devices which connect wirelessly to the public switch telephone network. The transmission of speech by radio has a long and varied history going back to Reginald Fessenden's invention and short-ship demonstration of radio telephony. The first mobile telephones were barely portable compared to today's compact handheld devices. Along with the process of developing more portable technology, drastic changes have taken place in the networking of wireless communication and the prevalence of its use. Predecessors. Before the devices that are now referred to as mobile phones existed, there were some precursors. They were accused of fraud and the charge was then dropped, but they do not seem to have proceeded with production. Beginning in 1918, the German railroad system tested wireless telephony on military trains between Berlin and Zossen. In 1924, public trials started with telephone connection on trains between Berlin and Hamburg. In 1925, the company Telephony AG was founded to supply train telephony equipment, and in 1926 telephone service in trains of the Deutsche Reichsbahn and the German mail service on the route between Hamburg and Berlin was approved and offered to first-class travelers. In 1907, the English caricaturist Louis Baumer published a cartoon in Punch magazine entitled Predictions for 1907, in which he showed a man and a woman in London's Hyde Park, each separately engaged in gambling and dating on wireless telephony equipment. Then in 1926, the artist Carl Arnold created a visionary cartoon about the use of mobile phones in the street, in the picture, Wireless Telephony, published in the German satirical magazine Simplicissimus. The portrayal of a utopia of mobile phone in literature dates back to the year 1931. It is found in Eric Kastner's children's book The 35th of May, or Conrad's Ride to the South Seas. The Second World War made military use of radio telephony links. Handheld radio transceivers have been available since the 1940s. Mobile telephones for automobiles became available from some telephone companies in the 1940s. Early devices were bulky and consumed high power, and the network supported only a few simultaneous conversations. Modern cellular networks allow automatic and pervasive use of mobile phones for voice and data communications. In the United States, engineers from Bell Labs began work on a system to allow mobile users to place and receive telephone calls from automobiles, leading to the inauguration of mobile service on 17 June 1946 in St. Louis, Missouri. Shortly after, AT&T offered mobile telephone service. A wide range of mostly incompatible mobile telephone services offered limited coverage area and only a few available channels in urban areas. The introduction of cellular technology, which allowed reuse of frequencies many times in small adjacent areas covered by relatively low-powered transmitters, made widespread adoption of mobile telephones economically feasible. One of the earliest fictional descriptions of a mobile phone can be found in the 1948 science fiction novel Space Cadet by Robert Heinlein. The protagonist, who has just traveled to Colorado from his home in Des Moines, receives a call from his father on a pocket telephone. Before going to space, he decides to ship the telephone home, since it was limited by its short range to the neighborhood of an Earthside, i.e., terrestrial, relay office. 10 years later, an essay by Arthur C. Clarke envisioned a personal transceiver, so small and compact that every man carries one. He wrote, "The time will come when we will be able to call a person anywhere on Earth merely by dialing a number." Such a device would also, in Clarke's vision, include means for global positioning so that no one need ever again be lost. Later, in Profiles of the Future, he predicted the advent of such a device taking place in the mid-1980s. US TV series Get Smart depicted spy gadgets with mobile telephones concealed in random objects, including shoes. In the USSR, Leonid Kuprianovich, an engineer from Moscow, in 1957 to 1961 developed and presented a number of experimental models of handheld mobile phones. The weight of one model, presented in 1961, was only 70 grams and could fit on a palm. However, in the USSR the decision at first to develop the system of the automobile Altai phone was made. In 1965, Bulgarian company, Radio Electronica, presented on the INFORGA 65 International Exhibition in Moscow the mobile automatic phone combined with a base station. Solutions of this phone were based on a system developed by Leonid Kuprianovich. One base station, connected to one telephone wire line, could serve up to 15 customers. The advances in mobile telephony can be traced in successive generations from the early 0G services like MTS and its successor improved mobile telephone service, to first-generation analog cellular network, second-generation digital cellular networks, third-generation broadband data services to the current state-of-the-art, fourth-generation native IP networks. Early services. MTS. In 1949 AT&T commercialized mobile telephone service. From its start in St. Louis in 1946, AT&T then introduced mobile telephone service to 100 towns and highway corridors by 1948. Mobile telephone service was a rarity with only 5,000 customers placing about 30,000 calls each week. Calls were set up manually by an operator and the user had to depress a button on the handset to talk and release the button to listen. The call subscriber equipment weighed about 36 kg. Subscriber growth and revenue generation were hampered by the constraints of the technology. Because only 3 radio channels were available, only 3 customers in any given city could make mobile telephone calls at one time. Mobile telephone service was expensive, costing $15 per month, plus 0.30 to 40 United States cents per local call, equivalent to about 176 United States dollars per month and 3.50 to 4.75 per call in 2012 United States dollars. In the UK there was also a vehicle-based system called Post Office Radiophone Service. It was launched around the city of Manchester in 1959, and although it required callers to speak to an operator, it was possible to be put through to any subscriber in Great Britain. The service was extended to London in 1965 and other major cities in 1972. IMTS. AT&T introduced the first major improvement to mobile telephony in 1965, giving the improved service the obvious name of Improved Mobile Telephone Service. IMTS used additional radio channels, allowing more simultaneous calls in a given geographic area, introduced customer dialing, eliminating manual call setup by an operator, and reduced the size and weight of the subscriber equipment. Despite the capacity improvement offered by IMTS, demand outstripped capacity. In agreement with state regulatory agencies, AT&T limited the service to just 40,000 customers system-wide. In New York City, for example, 2,000 customers shared just 12 radio channels and typically had to wait 30 minutes to place a call. Radio Common Carrier, or RCC, was a service introduced in the 1960s by independent telephone companies to compete against AT&T's IMTS. RCC systems used paired UHF 454 459ths of a megahertz and VHF 152 158ths of a megahertz frequencies near those used by IMTS. RCC-based services were provided until the 1980s when cellular AMPS systems made RCC equipment obsolete. Some RCC systems were designed to allow customers of adjacent carriers to use their facilities. but equipment used by RCCs did not allow the equivalent of modern roaming, because technical standards were not uniform. For example, the phone of an Omaha, Nebraska-based RCC service would not be likely to work in Phoenix, Arizona. Roaming was not encouraged, in part, because there was no centralized industry billing database for RCCs. Signaling formats were not standardized. For example, some systems used two-tone sequential paging to alert a mobile of an incoming call. Other systems used DTMF. Some used Secode 2805, which transmitted an interrupted 2805 Hz tone to alert mobiles of an offered call. Some radio equipment used with RCC systems was half-duplex, push-to-talk LOMO equipment such as Motorola handhelds or RCA 700 series conventional two-way radios. Other vehicular equipment had telephone handsets and rotary dials or push-button pads, and operated full duplex like a conventional wired telephone. A few users had full duplex briefcase telephones at the end of RCC's existence. Industry associations were working on a technical standard that would have allowed roaming, and some mobile users had multiple decoders to enable operation with more than one of the common signaling formats. Manual operation was often a fallback for RCC roamers. Other services in 1969 Penn Central Railroad equipped commuter trains along the 360 km New York-Washington route with special pay phones that allowed passengers to place telephone calls while the train was moving. The system reused 6 frequencies in the 450 MHz band in 9 sites. European mobile radio networks in Europe, several mutually incompatible mobile radio services were developed. West Germany had a network called A-Net launched in 1952 as the country's first public commercial mobile phone network. In 1972 this was displaced by B-Nets which connected calls automatically. In 1966 Norway had a system called ELT which was manually controlled. Cellular Concepts in December 1947, Douglas H. Ring and W. Ray Young, Bell Labs engineers, proposed hexagonal cells for mobile phones in vehicles. At this stage, the technology to implement these ideas did not exist, nor had the frequencies been allocated. 2 decades would pass before Richard H. Frenkiel, Joel S. Engel and Philip T. Porter of Bell Labs expanded the early proposals into a much more detailed system plan. It was Porter who first proposed that the cell towers use the now familiar directional antennas to reduce interference and increase channel reuse. Porter also invented the dial-then-send method used by all cell phones to reduce wasted channel time. In all these early examples, a mobile phone had to stay within the coverage area serviced by one base station throughout the phone call, i.e., there was no continuity of service as the phones moved through several cell areas. The concepts of frequency reuse and handoff, as well as a number of other concepts that formed the basis of modern cell phone technology, were described in the late 1960s, in papers by Frenkiel and Porter. In 1970 Amos E. Joel, Jr., a Bell Labs engineer, invented a 3-sided trunk circuit to aid in the call handoff process from one cell to another. His patent contained an early description of the Bell Labs cellular concept, but as switching systems became faster, such a circuit became unnecessary and was never implemented in a system. A cellular telephone switching plan was described by Flew and Nussbaum in 1973, and a cellular telephone data signaling system was described in 1977 by Hatchenberg et al. Handheld mobile phone. Prior to 1973, mobile telephony was limited to phones installed in cars and other vehicles. Motorola was the first company to produce a handheld mobile phone. On 3 April 1973, when Martin Cooper, a Motorola researcher and executive, made the first mobile telephone call from handheld subscriber equipment, placing a call to Dr. Joel S. Engel of Bell Labs. The prototype handheld phone used by Dr. Cooper weighed 1.1 kilograms and measured 23 centimeters long, 13 centimeters deep and 4.45 centimeters wide. The prototype offered a talk time of just 30 minutes and took 10 hours to recharge. John F. Mitchell, Motorola's chief of portable communication products and Cooper's boss in 1973, played a key role in advancing the development of handheld mobile telephone equipment. Mitchell successfully pushed Motorola to develop wireless communication products that would be small enough to use anywhere and participated in the design of the cellular phone. Analog cellular networks 1G. First automatic analog cellular systems deployed were NTT's system, first used in Tokyo in 1979, later spreading to the whole of Japan, and NMT in the Nordic countries in 1981. The first analog cellular system widely deployed in North America was the Advanced Mobile Phone System. It was commercially introduced in the Americas in October 13, 1983, Israel in 1986, and Australia in 1987. AMPS was a pioneering technology that helped drive mass-market usage of cellular technology, but it had several serious issues by modern standards. It was unencrypted and easily vulnerable to eavesdropping via a scanner. It was susceptible to cell phone cloning, and it used a frequency division, multiple access scheme and required significant amounts of wireless spectrum to support. On 6 March 1983, the Dyna-TAC mobile phone launched on the first US 1G network by Ameritech. It cost $100 million to develop, and took over a decade to reach the market. The phone had a talk time of just 35 minutes and took 10 hours to charge. Consumer demand was strong despite the battery life, weight, and low talk time, and waiting lists were in the thousands. Many of the iconic early commercial cell phones such as the Motorola Dyna-TAC analog amps were eventually superseded by digital amps in 1990, and amps service was shut down by most North American carriers by 2008. Digital cellular networks 2G. In the 1990s, the second-generation mobile phone systems emerged. Two systems competed for supremacy in the global market. The European-developed GSM standard and the US-developed CDMA standard. These differed from the previous generation by using digital instead of analog transmission, and also fast out-of-band phone-to-network signaling. The rise in mobile phone usage as a result of 2G was explosive, and this era also saw the advent of prepaid mobile phones. In 1991, the first GSM network launched in Finland. In general, the frequencies used by 2G systems in Europe were higher than those in America, though with some overlap. For example, the 900 MHz frequency range was used for both 1G and 2G systems in Europe, so the 1G systems were rapidly closed down to make space for the 2G systems. In America, the IS-54 standard was deployed in the same band as AMPS and displaced some of the existing analog channels. In 1993, IBM Simon was introduced. This was possibly the world's first smartphone. It was a mobile phone, pager, fax machine, and PDA all rolled into one. It included a calendar, address book, clock, calculator, notepad, email, and a touch screen with a QWERTY keyboard. The IBM Simon had a stylus you used to tap the touch screen with. It featured predictive typing that would guess the next characters as you tapped. It had applications, or at least a way to deliver more features by plugging a PCMCIA 1.8 MB memory card into the phone. Coinciding with the introduction of 2G systems was a trend away from the larger, brick phones toward tiny 100 to 200 gram handheld devices. This change was possible not only through technological improvements such as more advanced batteries and more energy-efficient electronics, but also because of the higher density of cell sites to accommodate increasing usage. The latter meant that the average distance transmission from phone to the base station shortened, leading to increased battery life while on the move. The second generation introduced a new variant of communication called SMS or text messaging. It was initially available only on GSM networks but spread eventually on all digital networks. The first machine-generated SMS message was sent in the UK on 3 December 1992, followed in 1993 by the first person-to-person SMS sent in Finland. The advent of prepaid services in the late 1990s soon made SMS the communication method of choice among the young, a trend which spread across all ages. 2G also introduced the ability to access media content on mobile phones. In 1998, the first downloadable content sold to mobile phones was the ringtone, launched by Finland's Radiolinja. Mobile payments were trialed in 1998 in Finland and Sweden, where a mobile phone was used to pay for a Coca-Cola vending machine and car parking. Commercial launches followed in 1999 in Norway. The first commercial payment system to mimic banks and credit cards was launched in the Philippines in 1999 simultaneously by mobile operators Globe and Smart. The first full internet service on mobile phones was introduced by NTT Docomo in Japan in 1999.